All right, I will call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. Blake. Merle,
Here.
Kelsey,
Here.
Robert. Glenn. Jenny.
Here.
Crystal, chair here. If you'll join me in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, work session. Dan, you ready?
I'm ready. So here tonight to present the superintendent and hopefully board goals for the 25-26 school year. These will be very familiar to you. They're the identical goals or targets that we chose last year based on what we submit to the state as part of our integrated plan. One thing to you may have heard of over the summer or last spring is, the governor passed an accountability measure to increase the accountability to schools. And so these items will be part of the different accountability measures. Now, we don't know kind of what happens when you don't meet the metrics or those sorts of things, but these, and then there will, none of this has been finalized yet, but what we've heard is there will also be two metrics that the local school board will get to choose from in addition to these 5. And so you were that was on the off the record meeting. So we looked at some of what they're discussing as options. I think anything that is one of a menu of choices that local school districts can choose from will be in alignment with what we're already doing or things that we've focused on. So and I only bring all that up is just to say is these data points aren't going anywhere. So tonight we're gonna look at how we did in last year, and essentially the goals will remain the same, but we have a lot to celebrate from last year's goals and an area to address, and then we'll also talk about where we will report on these in the coming months. So we'll start with our regular attendance. So as you can see there, we are now ahead of the state average by 1 percentage point. And our goal is still to get to 80%, which is an ambitious goal. And you can see there in every building, we had improvement. Especially want to call out that improvement at the primary level, getting primary school families in the routine of coming to school. So to have that go from our lowest to highest is really remarkable, and meeting right there at that intermediate level. And I just want to say the primary, intermediate, all 4 schools did a great job of building in a process by evaluating attendance and responding to it, and they did a presentation for you last year. But I want to say that intermediate and primary school under Michael Clutter, they were really interacting with families quickly and identifying barriers and things of that nature. So again, just a lot to celebrate on that one and continue to try to increase our attendance rate. Third grade reading. So we saw some growth from 23-24 to 24-25. So we had 7 percentage point growth in this area. Still a long ways to go to get to the state and our goal of 40%. And I think we could probably, if we wanted to, notch up that goal a little bit, but we still have a ways to go on it because I think the state improved a little bit there. You might see, one of the things when we get to the last slide, we'll talk a little bit about, doing a deeper data dive in a few months. But this again is something to celebrate and to see our students getting closer or moving closer towards our goal. So I don't know, Des, if you want to talk a little bit about some things that have happened in the buildings you believe led to this increase.
Yeah, we definitely are seeing that the work that the primary school is doing is leading those third graders to come in well prepared or better prepared than they had in the past. And in fact, this year, the intermediate school has specifically been able to say like, wow, these kids are coming with skills they've never had before. And they're doing a better job of being able to identify like where their gaps are. So we're anticipating this kind of steady progress. The other thing is that the intermediate school, about midway through the year, decided to do a realignment of their curriculum maps to the blueprint. So the state puts out it's called a blueprint of the state assessment. These are the standards we're going to be assessing on, things that kids will need to have experience in or have received instruction on prior to the test. And so the teachers were like, okay, how do we do a better job of ensuring that we actually hit the standards that they need to have hit prior to the test actually happening? So, I think about, my son asked me the question the other day, did you study Vietnam in high school? And I said, yes, but it was the last unit. And so sometimes we never got to it, right? It was the last unit of the year. What we don't want is like a major thing that is on that test to be the last unit and just not the thing we got to before the test. So they've done major realignment and we think that has something to do with that. As well as making sure that the kids have practice. Some other things that are happening this year though, is that the primary school is taking a look at like things like typing, for example, which really isn't hit until they hit the intermediate school with Jan Jones in the technology class. So if kids have not started typing and we think about the cognitive bandwidth it takes to like hunt and peck, we're making them do extra work, really, right? They can have the idea of this is what I want to write in their head. And if they're having to do this in order to write it, then it is taking a lot of extra effort for them. And that's even more so when we know we have language learners on top of it. So we're doing some investigation of like, should we be teaching typing at younger grades, et cetera, because of what we're asking kids to do.
All right, moving on to 8th grade math. And again, a very substantial increase there in our 8th grade math scores going from 9% to 21% and approaching that goal area. One of the things that I'm really, last spring was really proud of with our middle school team was their having a culture of really wanting to do well. I remember when they first started getting test results back from the state, Chelsea Landry, who's now our district literacy coordinator, is that the title? The district literacy coordinator. She was a coach here at the middle school last year, a teacher coach. I mean, she was literally running in from the middle school going, look at these results, see what we're seeing. And really, and that wasn't just Chelsea because she was the coach, that was something that the middle school administration, Chelsea and the teachers were talking about. We know these results don't reflect what our kids' abilities, and so trying to create a culture of kids doing their best, where teachers are really emphasizing, hey, we want to see our results be more of an indicator of what we believe our kids are capable of. So really want to recognize the middle school for having that culture there. And then Des will add a little bit more about what's happening instructionally. Do you?
No, probably not. I mean, it was our second year of Amplify here as well, and I know that we're definitely seeing an increase. I just think student engagement has definitely gone up with that. The teachers have really talked about how much they enjoy that curriculum, so that is definitely probably a part of it. There was also some work the last few years using TDG. It's the teachers development group, which is just like approaching math in a very different way. And how do we get kids to really not just like do rote memorization, I can solve this problem because you told me how to solve this problem, but how can I generalize a concept to apply it to multiple things? So we're definitely seeing that. I think the place that Dan and I are having a conversation about that is still an area of concern is obviously our language learners. Last year, we also had 0%, so basically right now, like, we could predictably say, if you are an English language learner, you will not pass the math test. And when we have a big jump, like 21% of our students now passing the test, that means that gap is getting wider, actually, right? It's great, but majority of the kids who are passing are English only students, so it's a concern to address.
Which from my experience, one of the things, and the test math has become has much more language involved.
Yes.
And a higher level of vocabulary, so, because historically, when it was a little bit more of a rote memory type of what are your math facts. Math is math from Spanish to English, like so historically, when I was a principal, are students that may have come from Mexico or Spanish was their primary home language, they still were pretty successful in math if they had math experience in the country where they came from. But with this test becoming much more of a language-based test, if we're not focusing on that English language vocabulary, then that's gonna be the barrier to their success.
We would have hoped, like, for me, looking that gap, like jump where we have like a over 10% jump. You'd hope we'd see like, and also a 10% jump in our language learners, the fact that it stayed at zeros,
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I'm wondering about the English language learners. I know a lot of their assignments are coming in Spanish. Is the state test that they're given also in there?
It can be given to them in Spanish,
Okay.
yes.
So it really is a language issue then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Ask my question.
So not gonna spend a ton of time on these next two, so on a ninth grade on track to graduate, so we saw a little bit of an increase in the percentage of students. Who finished their freshman year on track, so basically earning 1/4 of the credits that they're gonna need to graduate. So we saw the state numbers go up a little bit, ours went up a little bit, so that's good. The next one, on time to graduate, we saw a decrease, and to me, a substantial decrease to go down 8% of students graduating on time. And so one of the things, so again, I don't know, Des and I don't have a lot to talk about on this one. I don't know if you want to add anything to either one of those two.
Yeah, I think the concern I see with this also is, if you'll remember a few years ago, Bill and I presented a thing where it's like, here's how we can still see the impacts of the pandemic. And the class of 2024, the class of 2024 was the class where they started their freshman year as in the pandemic, like during, and so that year we had probably one of the lowest number of students who were on track to graduate at the end of their freshman year, and understandably so. We were in the middle of the shutdown, we were doing schooling online, but now we have like these kids, last year would have been 7th or 8th graders, I can't remember right off the top of my head, when the pandemic was happening. So we know skills were impacted, but really they got a fresh start in high school. So we would have hoped to see that by the time they exited, we wouldn't have seen this kind of a dip. If we had saw that kind of a dip in the class of 2024, it would have been like, yeah, that makes sense. They were most off track to graduate, and we see that they were really struggling to get caught back up. So the fact that this is kind of hitting where it is concerning.
So moving on to that, so I'd like the board to adopt these as our goals at the November board meeting. But then we were outlining the next several board meetings to take a deeper dive into the data. And so at our November meeting, I would like the high school to come back and report, and really it's almost a continuation of Mr. Stanley's strengths and opportunities report, but really hyper focus on what does he see and what are they seeing in terms of on time and on track to graduate, to really identify, he's aware of this data and he's having teams look at this data to figure out where are their gaps so that we don't see, so that we can continue to improve on the on track, which is that 9th grade data, but how do we respond so that we have better on-time graduation, which is essentially graduating within your cohort in 4 years. So, you know, and I know Kelsey, you contacted me a while back, you know, kind of identifying, you know, things that you were made aware of with students that you were concerned about. You've got kids in the high school. And so I shared, you know, those concerns with the principal, and he's, you know, he was quickly identifying some areas where, you know, to your concern of, you know, we never want students falling through the cracks, you know, what are we doing as a system to make sure that we don't have students falling through the cracks? And so, that's where, you know, the principal will come back and, you know, talk about what he's seeing and what they're doing to respond to those. So that will be the November 10th report, and then December 8th. That's about the same time last year that Des and I did a really deep dive into some of this data. So we're gonna look at all of this and go into seeing what trends do we see, what students are through the subgroup populations are not performing as well. We'll also have our vice principals come back and talk about their work around attendance, what we're seeing attendance wise. Then in January, we'll have our middle school report where they'll talk about 8th grade math and their fast bridge results. And then at the January work session is we'll have primary and intermediate talk about 3rd grade reading, because they'll have some data on their interim reading results at that point. So that's what's coming up. And then we got information on Youth Truth today. So the Youth Truth survey will be the 3 weeks in December for staff, students and families. So we'll do a big push on that. And then we'll get that data mid-January. So we might have some results for you at the January work session or early February. So. Any questions? Go ahead, Merle.
What is Fast Bridge and what is the cost to us and what is the perceived benefit?
So FastBridge is what is called a universal screener. It is a test we give 3 times a year. The cost to us for the entire middle school to take it, and they get it in both ELA and math, is like $3,000, I think, for the year, for all students to take it. The benefit to us is a couple-fold. One is that it gives the teachers data about where the kids still have gaps so that they can look to focus on certain areas where they may need additional instructional support. The second is it's kind of predictive in nature. These tests are designed to be aligned to the state tests. So we can tell if we have like a flush of population that is gonna potentially not do well on the state test, and what additional support could we be giving them to make sure that they're more successful.
So it's kind of a predictor of how they will do.
Yep.
On the state tests.
Yep.
And you mentioned earlier that the teachers were concerned about not knowing the material that was going to be covered on the state test. So maybe a little bit of teaching the test, but yet a desire to cover that material if they can know what to cover. And,
Right,
and we should know that, I think.
yeah.
To be able to cover it.
And I think one of the things that I always talk to people about when there was a while, I'll just speak very frankly. There was a while ago where that concept of teaching to the test became really a bad word. And I totally get it. We don't want to overassess kids, and we don't want to get to the point where we've lost a lot of really rich learning that can happen that isn't covered on the test. At the same time, the tests are aligned to the state standards. And when I give people the state standards and I say, which of these things do you think kids don't need to know and be able to do? There's never one that they're like, well, that's not important, just take that off the list. It's like, oh, these are basic skills that kids need. And the tests assess, do they have those skills or not? So when we're teaching to the test, it's like, yes, you should teach to the test, you know, much like if I'm taking a driver's test, I should teach to the test because those are the skills I need to be a successful driver. These are the skills they need to be able to be successful within math or be effective readers and writers and speakers. And so we want to know what they're going to be assessed on. So that's kind of where that teaching to the test comes in as well. Because what we don't want to do is expose students to an assessment where they're like, I've never seen this before. I couldn't do well on this even if I tried.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense to me. It's kind of like this ought you to have done and not leave the other undone, but
Yeah, exactly.
include that.
Just to add to that, I think that when the teach to the test notion was really getting a lot of criticism, I think the tests at those times were, what I will say was, have you seen an illustration before where it's collecting dots, where you see this brain opened up and it's like, how do we pour enough information? And really our tests today are connecting the dots. Most of our assessments now, whether it's reading or math or science, is really connecting ideas and concepts and using those skills, whether they're reading skills or math skills. And so I don't think the tests anymore are just trying to cram arbitrary facts into kids' brains. Just know this long enough to do well on the test. It really is a much more a skill-based assessment. So it's not as though that I don't have to remember this for a short duration of time and then I can no longer need this anymore. It's really more skills. So hopefully these tools like FastBridge will give our teachers information on where the gaps are. So that they can adjust their teaching to say, these are the concepts or the skills that kids don't know that we need to reinforce.
How often do they utilize those FastBridge tests?
FastBridge, they take it 3 times a year, so the beginning of the year, or middle of the year and end of the year. And then teachers use that data kind of constantly as they're getting it, so. It definitely, and it shows growth, right? So we can know how they started and kind of, are they on track to grow? The test that we take, FastBridge is, part of the Renaissance suite. Renaissance is the big parent company. This will be the last year we use FastBridge, I believe. We're gonna be moving to a different product within Renaissance called STAR, and we're gonna get every single school to use STAR. So we actually have comparable data from grade level to grade level, because right now, only the middle school uses FastBridge, so it's really hard to know, like, how does it compare? Are they growing from 5th grade to 6th grade, et cetera? So we're gonna get better alignment with that. And the nice thing is those assessments do, not only align to the state test, but they're also nationally normed. So we know how our students are doing compared to other students at their grade level across the nation. And we can kind of see, like, are we performing at an average rate as everyone else, as well as are we like in on track to meet state standards?
And I would anticipate that STAR would be one of the, as we talk about the accountability measures, that STAR will be one of the accountability measures that the state will want schools reporting on. I think there's a menu of options beside the state test.
They're gonna have 4. So the state right now, they passed a law at the legislative level, that's connected to this accountability. They're gonna identify 4 different assessments that we can use, that we will have to purchase. Which there is some hubbub at like the district level saying you guys are now mandating a purchase that you're not funding. We believe, we're like hoping, that STAR is one of them. I know at least at my off the record, when we went to the off the record meeting, I specifically asked the question, like, what are you gonna do for districts that enter into multi-year contracts with these organizations, because we get discounts when we do that. And we want consistent data from year to year, and then if that assessment isn't on one of the approved lists, and now we're in a multi-year contract. STAR is one of those, with our state learning grant that we got for literacy, we made a multi-year purchase of the STAR literacy to do K-12 assessment, because that was one of the requirements of the grant. We got a really good deal on it because of that, and we were able to purchase it up front because we only have that influx of money the first year. So we knew we needed to make a big purchase with the extra money we have this year, so that we have the test for the 5 years and we're not footing ourselves with a bill 4 years down the road. So we're really hoping they say STAR's one of them, because we've already bought it. At
But
least
you
for
don't
literacy.
know that for sure.
We won't, and unfortunately, the state is like dragging their feet. The good thing is, STAR is one of the biggest in the country, and there's a huge number of districts across Oregon that are currently using it. And it's really highly rated by Ed Reports as a really solid assessment with really good analytic metrics that go across, like I said, that nationally normed factor. So I would be shocked if it wasn't on the list.
of all of them, I would say that that's almost the one that's probably the gimme.
Yeah, stars and maps is the
Yeah,
two that I
yeah,
would say are
yeah.
gonna be probably like dead ringers in there.
Yeah. All right, we ready to move on to the next topic? All right,
Good.
so yes, so. Last year being my first year in the district, I don't, it was at some point at this juncture a year ago, I gave like my 100-day report and I kind of said how I was doing. And that really, and then we were having ongoing meetings about data prior to my evaluation in the spring. And so one thing that I would like to move towards as I continue to work in the district is to have multiple checkpoints, really 2 checkpoints leading up to my final evaluation in the spring.
Mhm.
So that we build in that, and those can be done in executive session. So that the board can have, kind of a more honest conversation with me about how I'm doing as it pertains to my final evaluation. So at the next board meeting, so we'll add executive session to the board agenda
Yep.
related to my evaluation. And what I'll do in that, in executive session is outline the evidence that I plan to bring to you throughout the year and then leading up to my final evaluation in the spring, so that you can give me feedback on whether those are the things that, the evidence that you would like to see in building up for that. So, I just wanted to have an open discussion in public so the public could hear, because this might be a new thing. And if there's any questions about that process before we add it to the agenda.
And I'll just add to that, that we use that OSBA framework that we converted to a Microsoft form last year, and we'll be following that framework again. So it's gonna look very similar to what you did last year, but we're just gonna have check-in meetings, so that Dan knows how he's doing and there's no surprises, which we all love. So,
Yeah, and so Crystal gave me what she sent you guys last year before it got filled out, and so I'm just gonna kind of use that as my template for what I bring to the board next month to say, based on this evaluation tool, this is what I plan to share with you as it leads up to my evaluation in the spring. And I just want to be able to have that more candid conversation, since it
Yes.
pertains to my evaluation in executive session.
correct.
Thanks.
All right, last item is, so when we've done these policy, we've got a good rhythm going on as far as our policy development goes. And one thing, kind of I thought was unique in terms of how I'm struggling to get to, oh, you've got it open. So as far as how policies are adopted and really asking ourselves the question, what's the purpose of first reading and second reading? And really the first and second reading is really for the public. Is really so that the public has the opportunity to have a reading of the policies before the board adopts them. And so as you can see from our policy here, that first, under number 1, first reading of a proposed policy or policies. This is an information item and no action is required by the board. And so, and I could keep going on there, but essentially, and we essentially do that, the policies are all, when they typically come up at a work session, they're out there for the public to view. A handful of them we'll have discussion on, because you'll ask for a discussion on these policies. Sometimes we make changes to those policies based on your feedback. And essentially, the board is conducted at first reading. Well, if when we did that, we ended up voting on the first reading. And that's the piece that I feel is unnecessary. I don't think it aligns to our policy. I think if we wanted to have it noted in the record that we've completed the first reading of the policies, we could acknowledge that in the record that we've completed the first reading. And there really doesn't need to be a vote on that. It's really for the public. And if you think about this, at our last board meeting where we adopted them, while we didn't necessarily declare a second reading, there was nobody in the public there to give public input. If someone from the public were to say, to have a concern about a policy, they could have come up during public comment. And at that point, if the board was still, you know, like, let's say someone in the public came up and shared information, concern about a policy. And as we got to those policies, you know, board members could voice, you know, I heard some things tonight that I think that we should wait to adopt this policy so that maybe the superintendent, district staff can consider what's been shared and we could have a further discussion. So now the fact that we had 2 board meetings with no one in the public and no one voicing that, I don't think there was any reason to not consider the work session and that board meeting, the first and second reading, and we adopt that day, because clearly there wasn't a lot in the public purview that caused anyone any concern. I have seen districts do a first reading, then a board meeting, second reading, and then the next meeting adopt. That seems almost excessive to me if there's not a lot of public comment, but I have seen districts do that. But really, the reading is for the public. So the public has the chance to weigh in, or not necessarily weigh in, but voice in their feelings about any policies that are being adopted or revised. So wanted to put that out there. So I've had this conversation with board leadership. Crystal's given me some, I'm not gonna go into all the different things, but she kind of outlined some things, and we're in alignment with that as far as board leadership about this process. But essentially removing the vote after a first reading. And really, the only vote is the adoption.
Yeah, because I went ahead when Dan brought this to me and did a bunch of research on the back end that I can share if one of you were interested. Regarding it and how school boards do policy work in other places in the state of Oregon, outside the state of Oregon. And it clearly lined out that an agreement with what Dan had said. The first reading was for the public, and it was just a, hey, this policy is coming up for review. And then that's where we can give some feedback or questions, or we can wait till the second reading. So the second reading is where typically you would give a lot of feedback. So the first was just like, hey, this is coming up. The second reading is where we offer some insight, some discussion, and those pieces that we can have with our superintendent, and where we have public comment in those pieces. And then he would make an adjustment as we needed, and then would bring the policy back for final review and adoption. Oftentimes, as Dan was saying, just to reiterate that, we have done a second reading and adoption because he is so good at his work that he communicates beforehand. So we don't have that 3-pronged piece, but it is really the standard. And so I want to align to the standard as board leadership. Jenny, you want add anything? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why we're bringing up this policy tonight. Because I think me personally, I've thought we've been aligning to the standard, but apparently not. So I want to make that course correction, and as we go forward with our policy updates that come out quarterly, right? Quarterly?
Yeah,
Okay.
I thought this was a good time to have it versus when we get the policies and, you know,
Yeah.
so we can say, hey, when we do this next time, we won't be doing any kind of voting after the first reading.
Yeah,
It'll
so
simply be the first reading.
it'll simply show on the agenda first reading, and I'll acknowledge it, just like we acknowledge everything else.
Sounds good.
Right? Good. Merle.
You talk about the standard, and I would have a question, is where does the standard come from, or who sets it that you're discussing here?
Well, I actually went above and beyond the school board piece, and I went to how the legislation components are working for like bills and readings and all that sort of thing. And they do still follow that first, second
Right,
adoption.
they do.
Mhm.
And when they call a first reading, if they really want to be stringent, reading means reading. They stand up and read through it.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about not reading through it and doing less of that.
Oh,
And
no.
so I'm questioning that reading is for the public. I think it's for the board.
Well, I think that when I have a policy item of a first reading going
Mhm.
on, I'm reading those policies at home.
Yeah,
Right,
So we may not be voting on those policies in a first reading, but you should be doing your homework of reading your policy work as soon as you see a first reading come. So that you have time to ask yourself the questions, process, ponder, and everything else that you'll need to do before you get to a second reading where discussion will take place. So when we put first reading on there, we won't be voting on it. But I do expect everybody to be doing their homework and reading them.
yeah, and I agree. We
Yeah.
have, we're given those in time if we
Mhm.
don't procrastinate. And
I'm not calling you out.
I won't say I never do that, but we could read them and be conversant with it. The
Mhm.
missing piece, for me, personally, I can't speak for the rest of you, you'll have to do that, but the missing component is the discussion amongst ourselves, the board.
Mhm.
And it seems like this policy makes that difficult to do. It says unless the board by majority vote moves to bring it to discussion, we aren't going to discuss it. And then when we come to the second reading, we're gonna call that we've read it the second time at home if we wanted to, and we're voting on it, adopt or don't adopt. And we can discuss it then, but we're nearly to the end of the line by then, and I missed that opportunity to ask you what you think, or you think, or you think about this policy, and let us go back and forth with it some.
Well, I will say that I am very, I don't know what the word is, but I'm very rigid on making sure that the policy work is done in work sessions. So that we do have time to have open frank discussion like we are now.
Yeah.
So you'll notice like we submit our questions ahead of time and then we go through and we can talk through our questions. And Dan brings that forward, like there was this question about this policy work and that piece. So to me, if someone isn't submitting their questions beforehand, then that tells or communicates to Dan that there isn't any questions on that policy.
Okay.
And there wouldn't be any reason why a policy couldn't be
No.
up for discussion during that
Regular.
first reading. I just wanna know that in advance so that if those questions or discussions, I'm just prepared for them, but there would be no.
Mhm.
You know, nothing precluding a board member from going, I want to discuss. All of these, or here's the ones, but I just wanna make sure that
Mhm.
I'm prepared to respond to them, but the board can have the discussion all at once.
And I have sent Dan a laundry list of policies that I wanna cover.
Mhm.
And oftentimes it's just a quick clarification, but at the time. I was pondering what the true meaning of it was, and then after a 5 minute or less conversation, I'm like, oh, got it, moving
Yeah.
on.
Well, this does allow for that. It just would put the burden on me to come prepared to move.
Thank you
To
for
put
your
this on the
service.
agenda. You know,
And
Yeah,
the board had, you know, if you think
I
about
missed
the
that.
stipends one, with the board member stipends one. That was all the board discussing, what do we wanna do here with these, you know, board member stipends, and clearly we landed with, we don't want any of this language in here at all.
No,
Even though I felt like having it in place for a future board might have been advantageous or what I recommended. At the end of the day, the board said, we don't want any of this language in here.
yeah, I don't wanna be visited by the ethics committee.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, the board, hearing the board, like, okay, that's gone. So that was definitely a good discussion.
Right.
yeah, I like those.
Yeah.
All right, anything else? Any other questions on BFC? And this has already been adopted with our August adoption, but we're just bringing it back up because there is like a process change that I'll do in meetings. Anything else?
And I think we need to feel free to bring them back up.
Mhm.
That too, it's. Well,
Yeah,
This is a job that is somewhat time consuming and sometimes onerous and, but if you wanna do that, I can see that, I accept that, that's up to me to take more time and energy and do it.
We appreciate you. Elsie, you good?
I'm good.
Robert?
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Jenny?
nothing.
All right, I will adjourn this meeting at 6:40. Yeah,
Yes, thank you.
Go.
thank you. Ready?